Welcome back to the table. Today we just played Forest Shuffle. In fact, if you watched our live stream, you saw us play it. That was my first game. Ryan had played a few other times. We are going to talk a lot today about who we think this game is for, who it's not for. But we're also going to give you a brief description about what the game is doing as well.
Yeah, it's a very interesting game. It feels in some parts like a drafting game where you're trying to take cards off of this clearing here at the right time. It feels a little bit like a tableau builder. I mean, it is a tableau builder in that you're laying out...
First and foremost, tableau builder.
All these trees, but it doesn't operate like what you'd think. A lot of tableau builders have engine building elements, and while this has a little bit of that, a lot of what you're doing, in fact, almost everything you're doing is about your in-game score.
Yeah.
There's no resources to generate or anything like that. In fact, a lot of these cards that you're playing are paid for by discarding other cards from your hand. And then on top of that, almost every card in the game is multi-purpose. You've got cards that can either go on the top or the bottom, or cards that go on left and right. So every time you're playing cards, you're discarding other cards. You're deciding if you're going to play on the left, which means not the right. So these multi-use cards, I think, are really what takes the center stage, at least for me.
Yeah, multi-use cards is definitely one of the key elements. If you like multi-use cards games, I think you'll like this. Yeah. Not only with the way the different cards are structured, but like Ryan touched on, you're spending cards to play cards. So... and those cards go out for grabs for everyone else. So you want to be careful about what you're spending because you're putting them in a display that some people could take from. Ryan mentioned drafting. I would say drafting is a term I don't know that I would use. You are taking cards from a display or the top of the deck. It's not in any sort of, there's no like sort of round where everyone drafts from anything or anything like that. But you, like I said, you got to be careful about what cards you put on here. One thing I do want to point out about what the game does is as you're building your forest, for lack of a better term. That's what they call it in the game. It is a tableau, but all these cards are built around trees. You're planting trees, then you're putting all these various things around the trees. The thing you need to know about all the cards is it's as if you're putting, if you've played Terraforming Mars or any game like that, some of the cards have some scoring aspects to them. Almost all of them, not quite all, but almost all of them have some scoring. Some of them are just face value, like this is worth 10 points. Some of them might be, this is worth X number of points if you did this other thing. And then some of them might be set collection, like these butterflies. Think of all the different scoring objectives you might see in a game like Cascadia that are public objectives, but on some of the cards that you're playing. So you're kind of finding some of those scoring opportunities, putting them into your tableau, and then you're on the hunt for the rest of the game to exploit those as much as you humanly possibly can.
I mean, for sure, which, you might not be able to do. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this deck of cards. You kind of have to wait and see if other players discard the cards that you need to pay for other cards. That you might have some cards that pop up on this row here, but this row can only hold 10 cards. As soon as the 10th card is placed, everything wipes. So you can you can't just wait. If you see a card out here that you really like, you can't hold off on it, especially in a 4-player game, because it might go away. And like David said, there are a lot of cards that score like in some kind of synergy. And you might start going in one pattern and then realize that you have maybe some better scoring opportunities in your hand. Then you kind of can pivot a little bit. But you can find cards that really work together, that trigger off each other, that score points together. Even, if you really play this game a couple times, you'll start to see some of the different animal types that really work well together. And you can kind of start building your combos kind of based on those ideas.
Yeah, and if you are a competitive gamer, I'm going to say this before Ryan does. It's going to be the kind of thing where there's hate choosing or hate drafting, if you will. If someone puts a card out here, people who want to be competitive are going to look around the table and go, well, we can't have Ryan get any more horse chestnut trees because it's one of these, or David get any more of these butterflies, which I was able to max out in our game. Yep. Then you're going to take that into consideration. I will say that that's going to get a little unruly, more on that later. With more people around the table, it's going to be hard to consider that. It's going to slow the game down. More on that later. But it is an interesting game, and speaking of how it ends or how long it takes, it's going to be controlled by the deck of cards. You're going to take some cards out depending on player count, but every game is going to have 3 Winter is Coming cards in the bottom, effectively, third. You shuffle 2 of those in there, and then you put the top one on the bottom third of the deck. And then you're going to go through, and once 3 of those come up, that is a hard stop end of the game. There's no finish the turn, finish the round. It's like as soon as you reveal that, go to final scoring, even if it's in the middle of someone's turn. Now, I want to bring something up that I think Ryan's going to maybe argue with me.
I might. I mean, I don't know what this is. You're dropping this on me.
I told him when we first started playing it for the live stream that I thought there were some things that it does that I felt were very much like Ethnos. Now, this depends on how you look at Ethnos and what part of Ethnos is the most important thing to you. I think Ryan looks at Ethnos and thinks area control, area majority, controlling that map out there, which it is about that. I look at Ethnos and I think of all the mechanics involved, and there's a lot of similar mechanics here in that on your turn, you're either drawing cards into your hand or playing cards. And when you play cards, you have to take some of the cards in your hand and pay for those, putting them into then the display that's available to others, which is effectively the exact same cycle that you go through in Ethnos. Now, it's a little different. In Ethnos, you're getting rid of all of the rest of your cards. In this one, you're usually just paying maybe 0 up to 2
or
are there
3.
any 3?
There might be.
Yeah,
I have at least 1 3.
Paying some of those cards to the display. And those 3 winner cards are just like the 3 dragons in Ethnos, where you keep going down, and on your turn, you can say, you know what, I'm not going to take any of these cards. I'm going to take from the top of the deck because I really want to start trying to make this game end.
Yeah.
So if you like those mechanics, not necessarily the area majority or area control, but if you like those types of mechanics, this definitely pushes a lot of the same buttons.
The way you play cards is very different, but that sense of tension of getting down to like, okay, well, you might feel a little safe with the first one, and then you feel a little less safe with the second one, and then you're like on bated breath knowing like anytime you draw cards. Like that feeling that you get at the end of Ethnos when no one wants to draw from the deck. Now this game does.
Or someone does.
Or someone just wants to end it, right, which can happen. This game does force the game to move forward. Every time you play a tree, you have to add cards to the tableau. Now, one thing that's different about that feeling of Ethnos that I mentioned earlier that I think is good is that when there's 10 cards out here, it wipes. So you have to also, like, you can't feel like you can just dump a bunch of cards because, like I said, if there's cards out here that you want to draft later, you need to be very careful about not letting this wipe. And so, like, with that being said, let's jump into who it's for and who it's not for. Because I think we've definitely talked about something, and David said I'd have more to say. And I do think when you're looking at who this game is for and not for, you need to look at your own group. Because a lot like games like Azul or any kind of like drafting game, even like Seven Wonders, you've got to know your table. And if you're playing at a table of people that really likes to hate draft, that really gets pleasure out of like, oh, there's 9 cards there, I'm going to play the 10th so you don't get that. Some groups play like that. Some groups don't. They'd be like, why are you being a jerk? That's a jerk thing to do. And I think you have to know.
That's my group.
Well, you want to know your group because it can feel really bad if 3 people are playing that very competitive game and one player's like, I'm just trying to get butterflies because they're pretty. And I think you have to know your gaming group. And it almost feels like, I'm not saying that there should ever be a discussion at the table, but any kind of gaming group where some people are very competitive and some aren't, I think it does warrant a little bit of a discussion of like, this could happen in this game.
For sure. That could happen. And, when it happens, either type of person needs to roll with it 100%. We come at this topic as 2 different types of people here. Ryan is a more competitive gamer than I am.
I would be the one that wipes the clearing.
Yeah, for sure. He's the one looking at everyone else's tableau and going, I have 2 options. Either one's fine. But so then, process of elimination, that's the logic that you'd go through. Like, well, which one can I take that hurts someone else? And that's completely fine. That is not how I play games. I don't think about as much about winning as others. I know I'm probably the oddball here. But with that said, I wouldn't say that this is a game built for aggressive interaction.
But it can be.
But it can be
But
there.
it doesn't need to be. It definitely doesn't need to be.
It can be there. It is in kind of contrast to this nice, lovely, naturey theme. But it's definitely there because I can tell you, even if I was on the receiving end of it, which I typically would be, once I had 4 of the 5 butterflies I wanted and I was on the hunt for the one, if there are other competitive gamers at the table and they saw that was the matter of me getting 12 or 20 points at the end of the game, they might take that and they might spend it, or they might, have that one opportunistic card that lets put them cards in the cave, and then you can bury a bunch of cards that everyone else wants there in your cave. But I do think it can be for both people.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to get that out of the way first because, like I said, that can be a pro, a for, or a not. I personally really like that idea of like being able to control when that clearing clears. And like, there was a sense of tension of like, I don't want to pay this 2-cost card because that puts it at 9. And if David pays something, then it's going to wipe that. So Even if you're not doing it on purpose, I liked that tension of all this. It's not push your luck at all, but it almost felt like push your luck because sometimes you've got cards in your hand that you really want to keep because you really want to play them later, but you really need to get this tree out, and so you have to pay with that card. And when you do, you have that like look on the table, like I hope nobody realizes how much I need this card.
Well, yeah, there are moments. There are moments where I paid with cards, knowing that the clearing was empty enough that unless Ryan really wanted to use those cards, on my next turn I was just going to pick those cards back up. And sometimes I was playing. There's a lot of combos in this game too. I was playing these Douglas Firs, which let you take another turn. So I was able to pay for those Douglas Firs. And then if I wanted to get those same cards back, I could take them back in my hand. And I had a few Douglas Firs that all benefit from paying with a certain color. So I was able to chain a lot of those together. To what end? Well, I got a lot of Douglas Firs played. They were each worth 5 points, but they let me chain a bunch of turns together. So that sort of economy of actions, which is at play for sure here. One other thing I wanted to mention in terms of who I think this is for, and for me, this takes front seat. And that is, if you like games that give you just a multitude of crazy scoring opportunities that you're collecting as you pick up cards, and you're like, oh, maybe I want to do this. Oh, or I could score points this way. And it's going to tear you in all sorts of different directions, but you're building that tableau. So people are looking, someone might not be doing butterflies. So unless he's paying attention, he may not have even seen a butterfly card close enough to look at how it scores. And if he looks over, he can see, oh, wow, that's interesting. And then I'm going to be basically hunting for butterflies for the rest of the game. Yeah. At the beginning of the game, you're going to set a few things in motion, and you're probably going to chase those things until you either get them or until you see other players at the table also going after them, maybe more successfully. Yeah, and then you're going to go, like Ryan said, pivot. And you're going to go, okay, what else can I do? And again, after having just played it once for me, those opportunities to pivot are just constantly being dangled in front of you with every card. If you draw a bunch off the deck, you're going to be like, oh, what's this do? Oh, that's better than the thing I thought I was doing.
You were like, let's change our whole strategy now. And like some of these, it's like every single card you draw, and when you draw blind, you realize, oh, there's like so many different possible, and not just scoring opportunities, but also like David said, if you pay with the right colors, which is a whole bunch of icons everywhere. And again, collecting all these icons, and some things score for certain icons and different combinations of icons, and then you play a card that has those icons and realize that it also scores for something. So you can get yourself into this chain that feels really satisfying when it's done. But speaking on that satisfying tableau you're building, one thing that I really appreciate, and I think a lot of you will appreciate, is there is no real take that in the game. We talked about the ability for some hate drafting. But there's definitely the ability to speed the game along when you think you're winning. But there's nothing that's going to steal
You're not burning down anyone's trees.
Right, which is something in some games you have that. And for me as a gamer, I know some people might enjoy this feeling, but it's very frustrating for me to have this all set. And then David goes, your bird is gone. Like I'm taking your bird out of your tree. And I'm like, well,
I'm playing a forest fire card.
I was building my whole strategy around that bird. Now it's gone. There's none of that in this game, and I personally appreciate that quite a bit.
No, that is nice. So if you're looking for that level of interaction, maybe it's not for you. And speaking of who it's not for, there's a couple more points I think we want to make. One, this is a simple little point, and maybe it'll bother you, maybe it won't. There's a lot of mess on the table at the end of this game. On one hand, it's cool, the system they've come up with where you put the tree down, and then you can put cards in around all the sides of the tree.
Yeah.
You have to be careful, or it becomes very messy. And honestly, that translates over towards the end of the game where you're trying to score this game. And it takes a minute.
No, it does.
It really does. This sounds like it's not a complaint, but it's a point that I think should be made. I think there's probably a fair percentage of games where someone's going to miss score because they may have overlooked one of their cards.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest complaints of this game, because I really love the artwork, but the graphic design can be a little clouded. Like if you're looking at this wolf, for example, it's 5 points for every deer symbol, but then right above it, it's telling me draw one card for every deer symbol. When I'm looking at all my icons, my eye is just drawn to that deer symbol, and I have to remind myself, that deer symbol is not what scored. It's scoring this symbol, which is like literally not even an inch away from that.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at this wolf, I'm like, okay, it's a paw print and a deer. No, wait, it's not a deer. And I think that they maybe missed an opportunity. They could have maybe made that a little cleaner, because a lot of times
it's hard.
It's hard to see your icons because they are kind of like right next to the name, but then some icons are in the top. So like,
yeah, you're probably going to miss some of those. There is a digital implementation of this on BGA, which I'm sure does all of that for you.
it
I
does.
haven't played it.
It's much better on
So I'm
BGA
sure
for that aspect.
It could really help out, at least when you're trying to learn the game. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm no expert on this, but I can tell you there's a lot of conversation about it, and it's about like, oh, I think this scoring opportunity is broken. I think this scoring opportunity is broken.
They all are broken.
I'm not going to say that this game is perfectly balanced. I'm not going to say that it's broken. I don't know. But what I would encourage you to consider is not to be so upset when there's something like that. Plenty of games have things that are unbalanced. Now, with that said, I do think this game might go on a little long, particularly at higher player counts, because there can be a lot of careful consideration, especially if you got a table full of people who are like wanting to look at everyone's tableau. I think I've heard the game can overstay its welcome. In my first play, it didn't. I think it was the right amount of time, maybe a little long, but there's a lot of sort of physical fiddliness. There's a lot of mental fiddliness, and I think there's going to be some things where people look at something that Ryan scored and go, oh, well, man, you totally exploited that. How could I compete with that? Well, there's probably some ways to compete with it, but it might feel a little bit broken.
Well,
to some people.
a lot of it is player controlled. A lot of what's happening in this game is completely player controlled. The game can feel like it's going on forever if people are being very efficient and they're never drawing cards from the top of the deck. If you don't draw cards from the top of the deck or play trees to get more cards coming out, this game can just go on. That's the timer for the game. You need at least a couple players to recognize, like, okay, we're in a pretty good spot. Let's not just try to get 1,000 points. Let's try to get through the deck. And then secondly, some of these combos are more powerful than others. We mentioned hate drafting a little bit. In a 4-player game, you're going to have multiple people going after the same points. So you're not going to just have one player. But if you do have one player and only one player that's like taking every bird that also scores for all your birds, you might get thinking and say, well, yeah, there's nothing we could do to beat that combo. Maybe you don't like that idea like David said earlier. You don't want to be that person that's like, I feel like I have to take this bird just so you can't have it, but I get no enjoyment from this. This does not help me in my game.
Even though I'm not that person, if ultimately you're going to play this several times with the same group and you're going to be competitive with it, you kind of have to adopt being that person a little bit. Otherwise, or you have to be fine with the fact that there's going to be some lopsided scores. And don't be bitter about like, oh my gosh, you destroyed me. Well,
I got 6 deer and 6 wolves. That's a lot of points. They multiply each other. So
And I would say, as the person, myself at the table that's like this, you can't have it both ways. Right. You can't say, this game's broken, what a lopsided score. Well, you could have hate drafted these things. There's several opportunities for you to do that, David. Oh, well, I didn't want to do that.
Right, well, exactly. And that's why
if you don't want to do that, then be prepared to maybe have a lopsided score. That's what I would say about
know your table. And again, I've said this about other games too. If every combo feels broken, none of them are broken, but the one that beats you will always be the one that feels broken. That's just how it...
Yeah, very rarely is the one that you won with the one where you think, this one was broken.
Right, exactly.
Because I really suck at games, so this must be broken.
That's right. Anyway, but all that said, I think for people that like what this game is doing, that like finding all those ways to score points, either way, you're going to be very satisfied with this game, for sure.
Yeah, I do. Agree with that. If you have any questions about it at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll be happy to get down there and answer whatever you ask, and also discuss a little bit more about who this game is for and who's not for. Because I do think there's a lot of feelings.
There's a lot of people on both sides of that too.
There's definitely a lot of feelings on both sides of that argument for this game. But until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, no matter whether you're aggressive or a friendly, Care Bear like myself. And we'll see you next time.